Ingrid, you need to leave, now. The voice crackled through my radio, my producer's panic cutting through the static like a knife through silence. The weather service just issued a red alert. The aurora storm is coming early. I stared at the massive stone formations ahead of me, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid mountain air. The weeping giants. 7 monolithic figures rising from the ancient plateau like silent sentinels. Trolls frozen mid-scream, their arms reaching toward a sky they would never touch again. Their faces, weathered by 4 centuries of wind and rain, still carried expressions of such profound anguish that even from 50 meters away, I felt my chest tighten. I can't leave yet, Thomas. I adjusted my thermal imaging camera, fingers clumsy in my thick gloves. The reading on the screen made no sense. My camera is picking up something. What do you mean, something? His voice rose an octave, the way it always did when he was genuinely worried. I zoomed in on the thermal display, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. Heat signatures. Not ambient warmth from the autumn sun that had set an hour ago. Specific localized heat deep inside the stone, pulsing, rhythmic, almost like they're alive. Phi, have you ever discovered something that shattered everything you thought you knew about reality? Something that made you question whether the rational world you've built your entire life upon was nothing more than a comfortable lie we tell ourselves to sleep better at night? In Scandinavia, we grow up with stories. Tales our grandmothers whispered by the fire on dark winter nights when the wind howled like wolves outside our windows. Stories of trolls and huldra, of creatures that walked these mountains long before humans learned to forge iron or build churches, long before we convinced ourselves that we were the only intelligent life on this earth. But we're modern people now, educated, scientific, rational. We've traded our folk wisdom for documentaries and peer-reviewed studies, for evidence-based thinking and reproducible results. We mock the old ways as superstition, dismiss our ancestors as ignorant peasants who saw monsters in every shadow. Yet sometimes, on nights when the aurora dances across the sky like ghosts performing ancient rituals, we remember that our ancestors believed these stories for a reason. They weren't stupid. They weren't hallucinating. They simply hadn't forgotten how to see what was really there. And on one particular autumn evening on the Hardangervidda plateau, when the first stars were beginning to pierce the deepening blue of twilight, I would learn that some truths are too ancient to die, too fundamental to be erased by skepticism or science or the comfortable certainty of modernity. Hello, my name is Ingrid Larson. I'm a documentary filmmaker from Oslo, or at least I was before my career imploded in the most spectacular way possible. This is my story. A story I've never told anyone before, not completely, not honestly. A story about the night I met Asta and learned why trolls turned to stone. Before we begin this story, don't forget to subscribe to support our channel. 3 months before that night, I sat in a sterile conference room in Oslo's media district, watching my career crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. The room smelled of expensive coffee and quiet desperation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city spread out below, all glass and steel and careful Nordic design. My last documentary, The Hidden Sami, had been pulled from the Nordic Film Festival. Not quietly, not with gentle explanations. Pulled with a press release that used words like journalistic integrity and concerning lack of objectivity. Accused of fabricating interviews, embellishing traditional stories. Making the mystical seem too real, too believable, too dangerous to the carefully maintained boundary between documentary fact and fictional fantasy. You crossed a line, Ingrid. The festival director, Per Nordstrom, sat across from me with his hands folded on the polished table. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Documentary filmmakers must maintain objectivity. Your subjects spoke of magic as if it were fact. You didn't challenge them. You didn't provide counterpoints or skeptical analysis. You made it seem credible. I had tried to explain, my voice steady even as my hands shook beneath the table. The Sami elder I interviewed, Johan Era, had shared stories passed down through 12 generations. Stories of the spirits in the mountains, of the way the land itself could speak to those who knew how to listen. I didn't fabricate anything, Per. I simply recorded what he told me. Isn't that what documentary filmmakers do? Record testimony? You recorded it without critique, without context, without making it clear that these were folk beliefs, not factual claims. Who gets to decide what's fact and what's belief? That question had ended the meeting. Per had stood, smoothed his designer suit, and delivered his final judgment. The scientific community decides, Ingrid. Evidence decides, and you provided none. My funding dried up overnight. Production companies that had been courting me for projects suddenly stopped returning emails. My agent called to tell me the deal with a major streaming service was being reevaluated. Industry code for canceled. My reputation, built over 10 years of award-winning work that had taken me from the fjords of Lofoten to the ice caves of Svalbard, dissolved like snow in spring melt. The journalism community that once celebrated my immersive storytelling style now whispered that I had gone native, lost my objectivity, become too close to my subjects, started believing their stories instead of reporting them with proper skeptical distance. My apartment in Grünerløkka felt suffocating during those weeks. The trendy neighborhood with its carefully curated vintage shops and artisanal coffee roasters seemed to mock me with its hollow authenticity. Everyone in Oslo was chasing the aesthetic of connection to Norwegian heritage while simultaneously dismissing the actual stories that heritage contained. They wanted rose-mailing and bunads for Instagram posts, not the uncomfortable reality that our ancestors believed in things we couldn't measure or explain. They wanted the culture sanitized, made safe, stripped of anything that might challenge their modern certainty. I couldn't breathe in that environment anymore. I needed to get away. Back to the mountains, back to the raw, unfiltered wilderness where I had always found clarity. My grandmother's cabin sat on the edge of Hardangervidda, Norway's largest mountain plateau, a vast expanse of nothing and everything that stretched from Finse to Rolldal. She had left the cabin to me when she passed 5 years ago, along with boxes of journals filled with her neat, precise handwriting. Stories she had collected from local shepherds and farmers over 40 years of summers spent in the mountains. Tales of the Vidda, the vast, treeless plateau where the wind carved shapes in the snow and the reindeer moved like ghosts through the fog. I packed my camera equipment with methodical care. The main camera, a professional-grade digital cinema camera that had cost me 3 years of savings. The backup camera, older but reliable. Spare batteries, enough to run continuously for 48 hours. The thermal imaging attachment I had borrowed from my friend Christian, who worked in mountain rescue. My laptop loaded with editing software, enough supplies for 2 weeks of isolation. Thomas called me twice as I packed. Thomas Bakke, my producer and the only person in Oslo's media community still willing to work with me. We'd been partners for 8 years. He was everything I wasn't. Cautious where I was impulsive, analytical where I was intuitive. It made us a good team, usually. "You can't hide from this, Ingrid," he'd said over coffee at our usual spot in Greenland. "You need to stay visible. Rebuild your reputation here, in the city, where people can see you doing legitimate work." "What's legitimate, Thomas?" I had asked. "Interviewing politicians about policies nobody cares about? Filming restaurant openings in Tjuvholmen for content agencies? I'm talking about rebuilding trust, taking smaller projects that demonstrate you can maintain professional distance." His silence was answer enough. The truth was, I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, toward the questions that had gotten me into trouble in the first place. Why did our ancestors tell these stories with such certainty? What had they seen or experienced that made them believe so absolutely in things that modern science dismissed? And why did I feel, deep in my bones, that they had been right? The drive from Oslo to Hardangervidda took 6 hours through landscape that shifted like time-lapse photography. I left the city before dawn, watching the first light paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Through my windshield, Norway transformed. The orderly farmland of Buskerud, with its neat red barns and carefully maintained fields, gave way to rougher terrain. Dense forests of pine and birch climbed the hillsides, their autumn colors brilliant in the morning light. Then the trees thinned, stunted by altitude and harsh winds. The road climbed higher, switchbacking through terrain that became increasingly barren. Finally, the Vidda itself. I crested a rise, and there it was, spreading out before me like an ancient ocean, frozen in time. A vast expanse of rolling tundra stretching to the horizon under a sky so enormous it made you feel like an insect. Countless lakes dotted the landscape, some no bigger than puddles, others vast enough to hold storms. Their surfaces reflected the sky like scattered mirrors. And everywhere, stones, boulders scattered across the landscape as if some giant child had grown bored with a game and wandered off. Some the size of cars, others the size of houses, all of them ancient beyond comprehension. My grandmother's cabin sat beside Lake Langavatnet, accessible only by a rough track that barely qualified as a road. My Volvo protested the entire way, but it got me there. The cabin was exactly as I remembered from my last visit 3 years ago. Simple, functional. Painted the traditional red with white trim, though the paint was weathering now, peeling in places where the wind had worked at it year after year. The roof was covered in living turf, grass and small plants growing thick. Inside smelled of wood smoke and time and memories. I opened the windows despite the chill, letting fresh air sweep through rooms that had been closed since last summer. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light. My grandmother's furniture sat exactly where she'd left it, the rocking chair by the stone fireplace, the simple wooden table and 4 chairs, the bookshelf, built by my grandfather, still lined with her journals. I pulled one down at random, the leather cover soft and worn with handling. Her handwriting, even in old age, had remained steady and precise. I flipped through pages, catching fragments of stories she had collected. Then I found an entry that stopped me cold. September 14th, 1987. Met Halvor Johansson today while walking near Bjørnesfjord. He insisted on telling me about the stone formations north of here. The locals call them de grottende giganter, the weeping giants. Says they've been there since before his grandfather's time, and his family's been in these mountains for 8 generations. Some believe they're trolls, caught by sunrise and frozen forever. But Halvor says he's heard them crying on nights when the aurora is strong. I asked if he believed in trolls. He looked at me as if I'd asked whether he believed in mountains. Belief isn't the question, Fru Larsen, he said. They're here whether we believe or not. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The weeping giants. I had seen them marked on topographical maps of the area, but had always assumed they were just an interesting geological formation. Now, reading my grandmother's account, I wondered. Had she seen something? Heard something? Known something she never shared with me? I spent the next 3 days preparing with an obsessiveness that surprised even me. I studied maps until I could trace the route with my eyes closed, calculated distances and elevation gains, identified potential camping spots and emergency shelter locations. The formations were about 18 kilometers northeast of the cabin, a solid 6-hour hike there and back. I checked my camera equipment obsessively, tested each piece multiple times, charged and recharged batteries, organized my pack with military precision. Thomas called twice during those 3 days, trying to convince me to come back to Oslo for a meeting with a potential sponsor. I declined both times. Whatever I was going to find out here mattered more than salvaging my career with compromise projects. On the 4th morning, I set out for the Weeping Giants. The weather forecast showed clear skies for the next 48 hours, though the aurora forecast predicted unusual activity. A solar storm had sent charged particles racing toward Earth. The sky would dance tonight. I packed camping gear despite the forecast. Something told me I might need to stay overnight. The trail was barely visible, a narrow path worn by generations of reindeer and the occasional hardy hiker. I followed it northeast, moving deeper into the Vidda's heart. The morning was clear and cold, the sun low on the horizon. Frost crunched beneath my boots. My breath formed clouds that hung in the still air. The silence was profound. No birds sang. The small birds had already migrated south. No insects hummed. Autumn had silenced them weeks ago. Only the wind, constant and patient, pushing against me as if testing my resolve. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness. Rolling tundra in shades of brown and gold and deep rust red. Patches of early snow in the shadows, lichen-covered boulders that had been here for 10,000 years. After 4 hours, I crested a rise and saw them. The weeping giants. My breath caught in my throat. My legs suddenly felt weak. They were not simple rock formations. They were enormous, 20, perhaps 30 feet tall, rising from a flat expanse of bare stone. 7 of them, arranged in a rough circle around a central plaza. And they were shaped like figures. Not vaguely, the way sometimes happens with weathered rock. Specifically, deliberately, impossibly. Each one was distinct, unique, individual. A massive figure in the center, larger than the others, her arms spread wide as if trying to embrace something just beyond reach. Her face tilted upward toward the sky. Smaller figures around her, children, clearly children, reaching upward with desperate pleading gestures. Their faces were carved in expressions of anguish so profound it hurt to look at them directly. Mouths open in silent screams that had lasted for centuries, eyes wide with terror or grief or both. Stone tears seemed to stream down their weathered cheeks, carved by centuries of rain following the same paths. I stood frozen on the rise, my rational mind insisting these were natural formations. Coincidence, erosion following patterns in the rock structure. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Belief isn't the question. They're here whether we believe or not. I approached slowly, my camera already recording. My hands surprisingly steady despite the awe churning in my chest. The autumn light was perfect for filming, golden and low, casting dramatic shadows that accentuated every detail, every crack and crevice, every weathered surface, every impossible curve that suggested musculature beneath stone skin. I filmed from every angle, circling the formation slowly. Close-ups of the faces, the hands, the bodies frozen in postures of desperate reaching. Wide shots showing the entire circle, the way they were arranged around that central space. Then I remembered the thermal imaging attachment. I connected it to my camera, fingers clumsy with cold, and something that might have been fear. I wasn't really expecting anything. Stone was stone. It would show ambient temperature, perhaps slightly warmer where the sun had been hitting it. I raised the camera to my eye. The viewfinder showed me something impossible. Heat signatures, not ambient warmth from the sun, not residual heat dissipating slowly. Specific, localized heat deep inside the stone, concentrated in the center of each formation, roughly where a heart would be. Pulsing, rhythmic, slow but steady, like a heartbeat measured in minutes instead of seconds. As if something with a metabolism, something living, was trapped within. My hands started shaking. The camera wobbled, losing focus. I lowered it, looked at the formations with my naked eyes. Stone, just stone, gray and weathered and utterly inanimate. Raised the thermal imaging again. Heat, distinct patterns that looked disturbingly like bodies. Like living bodies generating heat, breathing, existing in some impossible state. I checked the equipment 3 times, convinced it was malfunctioning. Recalibrated the sensors, restarted the system. The readings remained consistent. 7 sources of internal heat, each one positioned exactly where the stone figures stood. That's when I called Thomas. Ingrid, you need to leave. Now. His voice came through clear and urgent. The Weather Service just issued a red alert. The aurora storm is coming early. They're predicting the strongest geomagnetic activity in 15 years. I can't leave yet, Thomas. I was still staring at the thermal display. My camera is picking up something. What do you mean, something? They're alive. The line went silent for so long I thought I'd lost the connection. Static hissed softly. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured, gentle. Ingrid, listen to yourself. Stones can't be alive. Your equipment is malfunctioning, or you're misinterpreting the data. The weather is turning dangerous. You need to come back to the cabin. Thomas, I'm a professional. I know how to read thermal imaging. I've used this equipment in search and rescue training. These aren't equipment errors. There are heat signatures inside these formations. Consistent, patterned, rhythmic, like heartbeats. Another long silence. Ingrid, I'm worried about you. Ever since the festival incident, you've been searching for something that will vindicate your approach. But you can't let that search make you see things that aren't there. I'm not seeing things. I'm recording data, scientific, measurable, reproducible data. Then send me the footage. Let me analyze it objectively. The connection up here is terrible. I'll send it when I get back to the cabin. When will that be? I looked at the sky. The sun was already low, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. I'm going to camp here tonight. Ingrid, no. The aurora storm is exactly why I need to stay. This is when my grandmother said they could be heard, when the aurora is strong. Heard? Ingrid, they're rocks. Are they? I ended the call before he could respond. I set up my tent between two of the smaller formations, the ones that looked like children reaching toward the central figure. As I worked, hammering stakes into cracks in the stone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That the stone eyes, weathered and worn, were somehow aware of my presence. Darkness came swiftly on the vidda. One moment, twilight painted the landscape in soft purples. The next, night rushed in like a tide, and the stars emerged with startling clarity. No light pollution this far from civilization. Just the Milky Way sprawling across the sky like a river of diamond dust. I made a simple meal on my camping stove, instant noodles and coffee that tasted like ash but provided warmth. The heat of the food felt essential as the strangeness of my situation settled over me. I was alone on a mountain plateau, surrounded by stone formations I was increasingly convinced were not formations at all. Camping beside them, waiting for something I couldn't name. Around 10 p.m. the aurora began. I had seen the northern lights countless times before. Growing up in Norway, they were a regular winter occurrence. This was different, completely, utterly different. The lights didn't just shimmer and dance. They exploded across the sky in waves of green and purple and deep crimson red. Colors so intense they cast actual shadows on the ground. The entire plateau was bathed in their otherworldly glow, and the stone formations. The formations seemed to absorb the light, to drink it in like plants drinking sunlight. Their surfaces, which had appeared gray in daylight, now pulsed with a faint luminescence. Veins of light traced through the stone, like bioluminescent algae in deep ocean waters, like circuitry carrying electricity through ancient systems. I grabbed my camera, filming with hands that trembled so badly I had to brace against a rock. This was it. The proof I needed. Then I heard it. A sound so low I felt it in my chest before I heard it with my ears. A moan. Long and mournful, rising and falling like wind through a canyon. But this wasn't wind. This was the sound of mourning, of loss, of 400 years of consciousness trapped in stone. It came from the central formation, the mother figure with her arms spread wide. I approached slowly, my camera still recording, my heart hammering against my ribs. The aurora intensified overhead, the lights now moving in strange patterns that seemed almost purposeful, as if they were reaching down from space, trying to touch the stone. The moaning sound grew louder, more distinct. Other sounds joined it, whispers and sighs, and what might have been words in a language I didn't know, but somehow almost understood. I stood directly in front of the central formation now, close enough to touch the weathered surface, close enough to see every crack and crevice. The veins of light within the stone pulsed brighter, forming patterns that looked like a nervous system, like something waking up. Hello? My voice sounded absurdly small against the vast night. The aurora above seemed to pause mid-dance. The whispers fell silent. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, with a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake, a fissure appeared in the stone. Just a hairline crack at first, running from the formation's base up toward the face. Light leaked from the crack. Not reflected light from the aurora above, light from within. Green and gold like the aurora, but somehow alive. The crack widened. Slowly at first, then faster. Stone dust fell away in cascades. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I stood transfixed as the stone split further, as something inside began to move. A hand emerged first, massive, gray, with fingers as thick as tree branches, but not stone, skin, rough and weathered like leather that had aged for centuries, but unmistakably skin. Flexible skin that moved over muscle and bone, living skin. The hand gripped the edge of the crack and pulled. Muscles flexed beneath the gray skin. The stone fell away in great chunks, crashing to the ground with booming echoes. And she emerged. Asta. Though I didn't know her name yet. She was enormous, easily 15 feet tall even as she knelt there, partially emerged from her stone prison. Her skin was gray, the exact color of weathered granite, but textured like skin should be. Her hair hung in long, matted ropes the color of moss, falling past her shoulders. But her eyes were amber. Bright and aware and filled with an intelligence that made me forget, for a moment, to be afraid. They were human eyes. More human than many humans I'd met. Eyes that had seen centuries. She looked at me. Really looked at me, the way you might study something precious and fragile. When she spoke, her voice was like rocks grinding together, like mountains settling. But her words were clear. Norwegian, old Norwegian, but comprehensible. You can see me. It wasn't a question. Yes. I can see you. And you're not running. Should I be? She smiled, and it transformed her face from something frightening into something almost sad. Beautiful in its sadness. Most would. Most do. On the rare occasions when we wake. Their fear gives us no time to speak. They run, and we return to stone before we can explain. Explain what? She shifted, and more stone crumbled away from her lower body. I could see now that she was trapped from the waist down, her legs frozen in stone. The aurora blazed brighter above us, and she looked up with an expression of longing so intense it hurt to witness. Why we choose this, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. Why we turn to stone, why we endure this conscious imprisonment, why trolls become mountains. I fumbled for my camera, which I had dropped. My hands were shaking badly. She watched me pick it up, her amber eyes tracking every movement. You want to record this? I'm a documentary filmmaker. Recording is what I do. Is that okay? She considered this for a long moment. Will anyone believe you? I thought about the festival, about Per Nordstrom and his careful dismissals, about the journalism community that had already decided I had gone too far. Probably not. She smiled again, and this time there was something like approval in it. Then yes, you may record. Perhaps disbelief is safer than belief. Perhaps the truth is too dangerous for most to handle. She gestured for me to come closer with one massive hand. The movement was slow, careful, as if she was afraid of frightening me. I moved forward, each step deliberate. When I was within arm's reach, close enough to smell the scent of ancient stone and moss, she extended her massive hand palm up, an offering. I am Asta, daughter of Thorstein and Ragnhild of the old mountain families, and I have very little time. Dawn comes in 4 hours, and when it does, the stone will reclaim me. If you want to understand why we become the mountains, you must let me show you. Show me how. A memory share, an old magic, older than this prison. Touch my hand, and I will show you what happened. You will experience it as I experienced it. Every emotion, every sensation. I looked at her hand, massive enough to crush my entire body. But something in her amber eyes told me she wouldn't. That despite her size and power, she was asking permission. Offering truth instead of forcing it. I reached out and placed my small hand in her enormous palm. The world dissolved. Everything I knew as Ingrid Larsen vanished like smoke. I was Asta, 400 years ago, and I was young and curious about the humans who had begun settling in the valley below. The memory flooded through me with overwhelming intensity. Not watching a memory, living it. I could feel what she had felt, think what she had thought. The valley was different then. Fewer farms, smaller clearings, more wildlife. Elk and deer moved through the woods. The humans were different too. Harder, tougher, living lives of subsistence. But they sang. That's what drew me at first. The singing. Trolls don't sing, not the way humans do. We make music with stones, rhythms that match the heartbeat of mountains. But we don't create those soaring melodies that express emotions we don't have names for. I would creep to the edge of the forest at dusk and listen. One voice stood out, clear and strong, carrying across the valley like a bell. I learned later that his name was Bjorn. He was a shepherd, spending his summers high in the mountains with his flock. One evening, he ventured into the rocky highlands where my family made our home. He saw me. I expected him to scream, to run. Instead, he stood very still, and then he bowed. "Forgive me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear I could smell. "I'm searching for a lost you. I don't mean to trespass on your land." I was so surprised by his politeness that I actually laughed. "Your land?" I said in his language, which I had learned from listening. "This land doesn't belong to me any more than it belongs to you. The mountain owns itself." He smiled at that. And so it began. He would bring his flock to graze near our home. I would meet him in the twilight hours when it was safe. We talked about everything. His life in the valley, my life in the mountains. Both lonely. Both misfits. He was too thoughtful for the rough village life, always wondering about things others took for granted. I was too curious about humans for a troll, always asking questions my family found strange. When did friendship become love? I don't remember a specific moment. It happened gradually, like seasons changing. One day I realized I was arranging stones into patterns because I knew he found them beautiful. That I was learning human songs to sing for him, even though my voice was too deep to carry the melodies properly. That my heart could ache when he wasn't there and soar when he appeared. We both knew it was impossible, forbidden, dangerous. His people feared trolls, told stories of us stealing children and crushing anyone who wandered into our territory. My people viewed humans as pests, destructive and greedy, always taking more than their share. But in the long summer twilights of that year, none of that seemed to matter. We made plans. Ridiculous, impossible plans. We would leave together, travel to the far north where neither humans nor trolls would know us. We would build a life somehow. Love would be enough. It never is, of course. Love is never enough when the world is set against you. Late August came. Bjorn had to return to the village for the autumn slaughter and preparation for winter. His family needed him. He promised he would come back in spring, that we would leave together then. I believed him. I waited at our meeting place every evening for a week after he was supposed to return, standing on the ridge, watching the valley below, searching for him. He never came. On the 8th evening, they came instead. 30 men from the village, armed with axes and torches. I smelled them before I saw them. Sweat and fear and anger. Heard them before they arrived, heavy footsteps, voices raised in chants. They had discovered our relationship. Bjorn's younger brother had followed him one night and watched us together. The village elders declared Bjorn bewitched, claimed I had put a spell on him. They came to kill me and free him from my enchantment. My family heard the mob approaching. They gathered around me, forming a protective circle. "We'll drive them back," my father said, his voice steady. "We'll make them understand that attacking us means war." But I knew. I knew with a certainty that made my chest tight. If my family fought, if trolls killed humans, it would mean death for everyone. The village would come back with more men. They would bring more weapons and fire. They would not stop until every troll in the mountains was dead, and the humans would die too. Many of them. My family was strong, stronger than any group of humans. But they were also parents, siblings, children. If they fought, some would die. Maybe all of them. Because of me. Because I had fallen in love with someone I shouldn't have. I made a choice. The memory slowed here, showing me every detail. I stepped out from behind my family's protection and faced the mob. 30 men with torches and axes and faces twisted with fear. They raised their weapons when they saw me. I raised my hands, palms out, showing I meant no harm. "I will not fight you," I said in their language, "and I will not let my family fight you. This was my mistake, my choice. I will pay the price alone." "The price is your death, creature," one of the men shouted. I recognized him, Eric, the blacksmith. "Then take it," I said, and I meant it. But know this, Bjorn was not bewitched. He chose to know me, to see me as something other than a monster. If you kill me, you kill the proof that peace between our kinds is possible. They didn't care. Fear makes people cruel. My father moved to protect me. "Asta, no. I won't let them. Please, Papa." I touched his arm. "If you fight, we all die. You, Mama, the children, and we take innocent humans with us. Is that what you want?" His face crumbled, and I saw him understand. I turned back to my family, to their beloved faces. There's another way, the old way, the sacrifice way that grandmother told us about. My mother's eyes widened with horror. "No, Asta, no. That magic is forbidden. It's meant only for the most desperate circumstances. What is more desperate than this?" I knelt on the rocky ground. Behind me, the mob grew impatient. But my family understood. One by one, they knelt around me. My mother and father, my 3 younger siblings. We pressed our hands to the earth, to the bones of the mountain that had been our home. And we spoke the old words. Words in the first language, the tongue that predated all others. The words that turn flesh to stone. The words that imprison the heart while leaving consciousness intact. A living death. An eternal watch. The memory showed me the magic taking hold. Felt it from the inside as my flesh began to harden. Starting with my fingers pressed against stone. Spreading up my arms like cold, creeping through water. Not painful, exactly. More like disappearing. Like parts of me were slowly ceasing to exist. It's not the sunlight that turns trolls to stone, you see. That's a human story. A simple explanation for something they saw but didn't understand. We choose to become stone. It's the ultimate sacrifice. A way to remove ourselves from conflict without violence. A way to protect those we love by removing ourselves entirely. But the cost? The cost is awareness. The memory shared this with me, and I felt the full horror of it. We don't sleep. We don't dream. We exist, conscious and awake, trapped in stone, feeling the centuries pass grain by grain. We feel the wind wear us down, the rain carve channels in our faces, the ice split cracks in our bodies, the seasons cycle. The years blur together, but we count everyone. We feel it all, and we can't move, can't speak, can't cry out, can't even close our eyes. We can only stand frozen in whatever position we choose. I chose to spread my arms, to embrace the wind, to show that even in this eternal prison, I meant no harm. My family chose to reach upward, to reach toward me, toward comfort I could never give them. The last thing I saw before the stone claimed my eyes was the mob. standing there, weapons lowered, faces shifting from rage to confusion to dawning horror. I heard one man sob, a terrible, broken sound. What have we done? What have we forced them to do? But it was too late. The stone had us. 400 years. 400 years of standing here, watching the seasons cycle, watching the humans in the valley below grow and change, watching them forget us gradually, watching memory become myth, become nothing. The memory released me suddenly, and I was myself again. Ingrid, gasping and shaking, tears streaming down my face. I was back in my own body, my own time. But I could still feel the echo of what Asta had shown me. 400 years of imprisonment. 400 years of conscious stone. The horror of it was overwhelming. Why? I whispered, my voice breaking. Why would you choose that? Asta looked down at me, her amber eyes sorrowful and ancient. Because the alternative was worse. If we had fought, everyone would have died, humans and trolls. The valley would have run red with blood. This way, we removed ourselves from the cycle of violence. We became guardians instead of threats. But 400 years of consciousness? My mind couldn't fully grasp it. Is a long time to be aware and immobile. Yes, longer than you can imagine. But it's not eternal. Every few decades, when the aurora is strong enough, we can wake for a few hours. We can move a little, speak a little, remember what it felt like to be alive. She looked up at the sky. And we watch. We see what our sacrifice accomplished. The valley below flourished. Humans and trolls learned to live in peace, or at least in mutual avoidance. That was worth the price. And Bjorn? Her face crumbled. He spent his life trying to undo what happened. He became the village's loudest voice for peace. He told everyone who would listen that I had been his friend, not his captor. He married eventually, his family demanded it, but he never loved again. He died an old man, believing he had failed me. She touched her own stone cheek. But he hadn't failed. Because of what we did, generations have lived without war. That was worth it. But you're still here. Still trapped. Yes. And I would be until the stone finally erodes completely. Except... She looked at me with fear in her eyes for the first time. Except now there's a new threat. Climate change. Your people's name for the warming world. The freezing and thawing cycles are becoming more extreme. The stone is cracking. Can you see? She gestured to her body. Hairline fractures webbed across her surface. Deeper cracks split through the smaller formations. Her children. The next major freeze will shatter us, she said. We'll break apart and tumble down the mountain. And when that happens, we'll die. Truly die. Our consciousness will shatter with the rock. Can't you wake up fully? Leave the stone behind? She shook her head, the movement slow and painful. The magic doesn't work that way. Once chosen, petrification is permanent. We can wake partially during aurora storms, but we can't fully return to flesh. The price of sacrifice is eternal. Then what can I do? She squeezed my hand gently. The stones can be moved. It's been done before. If my family could be relocated to a more stable area, somewhere protected from the freeze-thaw cycles, we could endure. We could continue watching over the valley. You want me to move you? I want you to find people who will move us. I have no right to ask this. You owe us nothing. But... Her voice cracked, and I realized she was crying. Stone tears, actual tears, carving new paths down her weathered cheeks. But my children are in those smaller stones. They chose this prison because of my mistake. They were so young. I can't let them be destroyed. Not when there's a chance they could be saved. I looked at the smaller formations, saw them now for what they were. Children, reaching up toward their mother. Frozen for 400 years because they loved her. I'll do it, I said. I'll find a way. You understand what you're promising? They won't believe you. They'll say you're mentally unstable. They'll use this to finish destroying your reputation. Let them. I raised my camera. I have proof now, footage of you moving, speaking. Maybe people will believe it, maybe they won't, but I have to try. She studied my face for a long moment. You're willing to sacrifice your credibility for creatures you just met? You sacrificed 400 years of life for people who wanted to kill you. I think I can handle some professional embarrassment. She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Perhaps there's more troll in you than you know. We choose the hard right over the easy wrong. We protect those who cannot protect themselves, even when it costs us everything. What happened to Bjorn's family? His descendants? They still live in the valley, generations of them. Some moved to cities, but some remain. Good people, mostly. They don't remember us as anything more than local legend now. The aurora began to fade overhead. Dawn was approaching. I could see the faint lightening of the eastern sky. I have to go back, Asta said, and I heard the resignation in her voice. Will you remember this, when you're stone again? Oh yes, we remember everything, every moment of those 400 years, every conversation during these brief wakings. It's both a blessing and a curse. She looked down at me one more time. Thank you, Ingrid Larsson, for listening, for seeing us as more than monsters or myths, for being willing to help. I haven't helped yet. You've given us hope. That's more valuable than you know. She released my hand and began to lower herself back into the stone. The cracks that had opened sealed behind her. Her body stiffened, losing the slight fluidity of life. Her amber eyes were the last thing to go. They held mine until the very last second, and in them I saw gratitude and sorrow and a tiny spark of hope. Then she was stone again, utterly still, utterly silent. Just another rock formation on the Hardangervidda plateau. Except now I knew better. I stood there as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My camera battery was dead. My hands were numb with cold. My mind was reeling with everything I had seen and experienced. The hike back to the cabin took 6 hours, but I barely noticed the passage of time. I was too busy thinking about how to save sentient stone formations. When I finally reached the cabin, I found Thomas sitting on the porch. He jumped up when he saw me. Ingrid, thank God, I was about to call mountain rescue. He stopped when he saw my face. What happened? I need to show you something. We went inside, and I collapsed into my grandmother's rocking chair. I connected my camera to my laptop, my hands shaking. Thomas stood behind me as the footage loaded. Ingrid, before you show me, I need you to know that I care about you. I'm worried. Just watch. I pressed play. The footage showed the stone formations in thermal view, the heat signatures inside, then the aurora beginning, the lights in the stone, and then Asta emerging. Every impossible moment captured in high definition, her speaking, me touching her hand. The conversation before and after was crystal clear. Thomas watched in silence. When the footage ended, he sat down heavily. That's not possible. But it happened. It's a trick. CGI. You must have hired someone to create digital effects. With what money, Thomas? I'm broke. I couldn't afford CGI this good if I wanted to. He ran his hands through his hair. There has to be a rational explanation. There is. Trolls are real. They can turn themselves to stone, and we need to help them. Ingrid, listen to yourself. No, you listen. I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet my eyes. I know how this sounds. I know what asking you to believe this will cost both of us. But Thomas, I touched her. I felt her memories. I experienced 400 years of conscious imprisonment. She's real. They're all real. And they're going to be destroyed if we don't act. He stared at me for a long moment. What do you need? I hadn't expected that. What? If we're doing this, and I'm not saying I completely believe yet, but if we're doing this, what do you need? Who do we contact? It wasn't full acceptance, but it was enough. It was partnership. We spent the next 3 days developing a plan, working around the clock, reviewing the footage frame by frame, finding no sign of digital manipulation. Thomas contacted Sigrid Haugen, a colleague in the Department of Environmental Affairs, a woman who specialized in protecting culturally significant geological formations. We presented our request as a project to preserve an important historical site before climate change destroyed it. Technically true. We just didn't mention that the site was alive. Sigrid was interested immediately. She visited the cabin, reviewed our surveys, examined the thermal imaging data. The formations were indeed at risk from freeze-thaw cycles, and there was precedent for relocating sensitive rock formations. But it would take time, applications to file with multiple agencies, environmental impact studies, committees to convince, funding to secure, months at least, maybe longer. "Will they survive that long?" Thomas asked one evening as we reviewed engineering reports. "I don't know." Asta said the next major freeze could shatter them. But bureaucracy moves at its own pace. We filed the applications, made presentations to committees who saw only rocks, applied for grants from cultural preservation funds. All the while, autumn deepened into winter. The first serious freezes came in November. I hiked back to the weepinggiants twice, checking on them. Each time, I saw new cracks spreading across their surfaces, heard new sounds in the night, groans and creaks as the ice worked at their stone bodies. I tried to talk to Asta, standing before her formation. "We're working on it. We're trying. Please hold on. Please survive just a little longer." But there were no aurora storms strong enough to wake her. No response except wind and silence. I could only stand there, helpless, watching as they slowly fractured. In December, we finally got preliminary approval. A team of specialized engineers would assess the formations for possible relocation. It would cost a fortune. 2 million kroner, maybe more. Thomas and I pooled every resource we had. I sold my Oslo apartment at a loss, sold camera equipment I'd collected over years, called in every favor from a decade of documentary work. Thomas did the same, liquidating investments, maxing out credit cards. Sigrid fought for us beyond professional duty. She had become invested in the project in ways I didn't fully understand. Her grandmother had told her stories about the weeping giants until she saw our footage, until she stood before the formations and felt something she couldn't explain. The relocation began on January 15th. I watched the engineers work with my heart in my throat. They were professionals, careful, respectful, treating the formations with reverence. But they thought they were moving rocks. They didn't know that every impact was felt by the conscious beings inside. I whispered apologies to stone that couldn't answer back. "I'm sorry. I know this hurts. But it's the only way to save you. Please hold on." The engineers looked at me strangely when they heard me talking to the formations. But I didn't care. The smaller formations came first, Asta's siblings. Each one required 2 full days to carefully extract and load onto specialized transport vehicles. The engineers used diamond wire saws that could cut through granite without shattering it, hydraulic lifts that could handle tons with millimeter precision. The central formation, Asta, was the last to be moved, the largest, the most delicate because of how extensive her cracks had become. It took 3 days to carefully extract her. I rode with her in the transport vehicle, my hand pressed against the padded stone. "We're almost there, just a little longer. You'll be safe soon. You and your children." The cave system in Hallingskarvet National Park was perfect. We had found it after weeks of geological surveys. Spacious enough for all 7 formations. Stable temperature year-round. The deep cave maintained constant temperature regardless of surface conditions. Protected from the elements completely. And deeply isolated. No casual hikers would stumble across them. The engineers reassembled the formations carefully over 2 weeks, consulting my photographs to ensure they were positioned exactly as they had been. The mother in the center, the children around her, reaching up. The same arrangement they had chosen 400 years ago. When it was done and the engineers had left, I stood alone in the cave. The silence was profound. "You're safe now," I told the silent stones. "I kept my promise. You're in a place where the cold can't crack you, where you can wait for as long as you need to. Your sacrifice still matters." No response, just stone. But I imagined I could feel gratitude radiating from them anyway. Thomas found me there an hour later. "The engineers are impressed with how well preserved the formations are. They're talking about nominating the site for enhanced protection status." "That's good. More protection means more security." "Ingrid, we're broke, completely broke, both of us, and the documentary about this project, no one's going to believe it. Our professional reputations are destroyed." He sat down beside me, looking up at Asta's stone face. "So what was the point? We've bankrupted ourselves to move some rocks to a cave." I looked up at Asta's stone face, at the eternal anguish carved there, at the love that had driven her to sacrifice 400 years. The point was that someone had to care. Someone had to see her as more than a myth or a monster. Someone had to honor the choice she made 400 years ago. I wiped tears from my face. She gave up everything to protect people who wanted her dead. The least I could do was risk my career to protect her. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "You really believe she's in there, aware, conscious?" "I know she is." "Then I hope she knows what you sacrificed for her." We left the cave together, sealing the entrance with a gate designed to look natural. Outside, night had fallen, and with it, the aurora, stronger than any I had seen all year. Green and purple and red, dancing across the sky like celebrating spirits. I looked back at the cave entrance. "Thank you," I whispered, "for showing me that some truths are worth believing, even when the world calls you crazy for it." The light show intensified, the aurora blazing brighter, and for just a moment I could swear I heard it. A voice on the wind, deep and rough as grinding stone, filled with warmth and gratitude. "Thank you, Ingrid Larsson, for seeing, for believing, for caring when no one else would." Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe my exhausted mind was hearing what it wanted to hear. But I chose to believe it was real. Just as I chose to believe that somewhere in that cave, Asta was awake for a few precious minutes, feeling her new home, realizing she was safe, knowing that her children would survive. And maybe, just maybe, she was smiling. 6 months later, I released the documentary, The Weeping Giants, a story of sacrifice and stone. It was everything my critics feared, a film that treated the supernatural as fact. The response was predictable. Major film festivals rejected it. Documentary associations called it irresponsible. My few remaining professional contacts distanced themselves. But something unexpected happened. People watched it anyway. Online, the documentary went viral. Not because everyone believed it, but because the story resonated. People shared it with comments like, "I don't know if this is real, but I want it to be." And whether this is true or fiction, it's the most beautiful story about sacrifice I've ever heard. Letters started arriving, emails from people who had their own experiences with the unexplained, who had seen things they couldn't rationally explain, who had felt, as I had felt, that the old stories held more truth than the modern world wanted to acknowledge. I didn't become famous. I didn't get my reputation back, but I found something better. A community of people who understood that some truths can't be measured or proven. That belief isn't about evidence. It's about choosing to see wonder in a world that insists everything must be quantified. Thomas and I started a new production company. Small, independent, focused on documenting the stories that mainstream media dismissed. We're not wealthy. We're not celebrated. But we're doing work that matters. And once a year, on the winter solstice, I hike to Hallingskarvet. I sit in that cave with the 7 stone formations. I tell Asta about the year that's passed, about the people who were moved by her story, about the changes in the world. I tell her that someone remembers, someone knows, someone cares. And when the aurora dances bright enough, sometimes I hear her voice. Thank you for honoring our sacrifice. Thank you for giving our choice meaning. Last winter solstice, something new happened. I was sitting in the cave, talking to the silent stones as usual, when I heard footsteps. A young woman appeared at the cave entrance. She looked nervous but determined. Ingrid Larsen, I'm Astrid Bjorn's daughter. I watched your documentary, and I think I'm descended from the Bjorn that your troll spoke about. Family records show an ancestor by that name who lived in the right area at the right time, who spent his life advocating for peaceful coexistence with the mountain folk. My heart started racing. You believe the story? I believe my ancestor believed something, and these formations deserve respect and protection. So I've created a foundation, the Bjorn Asta Foundation for Cultural Preservation, to ensure this site remains protected, to support others like it across Scandinavia. I started crying. I couldn't help it. 400 years after their story ended in stone, Bjorn and Asta's legacy was finally being honored by both their peoples. Astrid looked alarmed. Did I say something wrong? No. You said something perfect. We talked for hours about her ancestor, about Asta, about the importance of protecting places where the old world and new world intersect. When she left, she promised to return, to help maintain the site, to ensure that the weeping giants would remain safe for generations to come. That night, the aurora blazed brighter than I had ever seen it. The entire sky was alive with dancing light. And in the cave, I heard not just one voice, but many. Asta and her children, all awake together for the first time in 400 years, speaking in their ancient language, singing, celebrating. I don't know if anyone else will ever hear them. I don't know if anyone else will ever believe. But I know this: some sacrifices echo through centuries. Some loves are strong enough to endure in stone. And some truths are worth believing, even when the world insists they're impossible. The trolls turned to stone not because the sunlight cursed them, but because love gave them the strength to choose peace over violence, to protect others at the cost of their own freedom, to become eternal guardians, watching over the descendants of those who once hunted them. That's the real story of why trolls turned to stone. And now you know it too. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but I truly hope that somewhere in your heart you choose to believe. Because the world needs more people willing to see wonder, more people willing to honor sacrifice, more people willing to understand that the old stories held wisdom we've forgotten, and more people willing to be bridges between the ancient and the modern. That's what Asta taught me. That's what I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The memory of a troll mother who loved so deeply she chose 400 years of conscious stone to protect her children and prevent bloodshed. That's worth believing in. That's worth fighting for. That's worth everything.